Hey everyone, Clay from Brooklyn, football with the fellas. It's all about Big Blue. Here with the Week 17 NFC East report. As you know, we come into this game with a 2-13 record, which is painful to say out loud, but true. We are also um, on the cusp of setting a new NFL record, which is we might be the first team in NFL history to go 0-9 at home for a season. Now, in fairness, there's only been 17 games for about 4 or 5 years now, so that's not a very lengthy record. But nevertheless, to be the first team to not win a single game at home in a whole season in the 17 game era is nothing to be proud of. And we face the Indianapolis Colts, who come in with a 7-8 record to compete against us without 2-13 record. But Mazo and I will talk about that game in greater detail later on. Right now, I want to talk a little bit about the rest of the NFC East. Two of the teams play against each other. The Dallas Cowboys, with their 7-8 record, head into Philadelphia to play against the Eagles, who are 12-3. The Cowboys are 20th in the league in points scored, averaging 21.5 points a game, and they are 30th in the league in points allowed, giving up just under 27 points a game, although that's actually a little bit better for them. They had been worse than 30th, believe it or not, for much of the year. The Eagles, coming off of a loss, surprisingly, come to Washington, come in ranked 8th in the league in points scored, 26.8 points per game scored, and 5th in the league in points allowed, 18.9 points allowed per game. So scoring just under 27, giving up just under 19. Actually, those numbers are both a little bit worse than they had been going into last week's when they were tied for first in the league in defense. So they've been a little bit of a slump for the Eagles, but I still like their chances against Dallas, especially at home. As far as key injuries, the DNPs did not practice this week for Dallas are CeeDee Lamb, Amani Hooker, and Chuma Edoga, the offensive tackle. And for Philly, of course, is Jalen Hurts, who's still in the concussion protocol. The key limited participants in practice this week are for Dallas are linebacker Eric Kendricks and cornerback Amani Oruwariye. And for Philly, it is Josh Sweat, Nakobe Dean, and AJ Brown, who's been on that list quite frequently. So that's the Dallas versus Philly game for this week. Again, they're at Philly, and Philly is 12-3 and fighting for the #1 seed in the conference. So I'm sure they're going to be giving it their best. The next game is Atlanta, who's 8-7 record, which they just improved to 8-7 by beating us last week. Goes into Washington to play the Commanders, who are 10-5, coming off that big win against Philadelphia, that big comeback win against Philadelphia last week. As far as the stats, Atlanta comes into the game 19th in the league in scoring and 19th in the league in points allowed, interestingly enough. They're scoring just under 22 and giving up just over 23, but they're 19th in both. As for Washington, they are 4th in the league in scoring. They are scoring 28.8 points a game, and they're 18th in the league in points allowed, just slightly better than Atlanta with a 23.2 points per game points allowed average. As far as key injuries, Atlanta has none on the did not practice list. Pretty much everyone that's a starter practiced. As far as Washington, tackle Andrew Wiley, newly acquired cornerback Marshawn Lattimore, who finally did get on the field but is now back on the DNP list, and wide receiver Dyami Brown, all did not practice this week so far. And as far as the limited participants in practice for Atlanta, it's former Giant Lorenzo Carter, Zach Harrison, Matthew Judon, and wide receiver Drake London. So a lot of their edge rushers, 3 of their edge rushers are on the limited participant practice list. And of course, their featured wide receiver Drake London. For Washington, it's a much shorter list. Scary Terry McLaurin, their key go-to wide receivers on the list, and defensive end Cleveland Ferrell, who's on it every week. So that's the Atlanta versus Commanders game. And then finally, like I said, the Colts play us, but we'll talk about that more later. So now I want to talk about the trivia questions. So last week's trivia question was an interesting one, I think. The New York Giants set a 20-year record last year with regard to turnovers. And I was curious if anybody figured out what that was. But the dubious distinction is that we are the first team in 20 years to lead the league. We were actually tied with Baltimore, but lead the league in turnovers created and still have a losing record. We led the league with 31 turnovers, which is supposedly the biggest predictor of wins and losses. The team that wins the turnover battle wins the game. We led the league in turnovers, and still we're only 6-11. That is impressively bad. Impressively good defense and impressively bad offense. So the net is that the team was terrible, even with 31 turnovers. Imagine what our record would have been if we didn't have 31 turnovers created last year. Now, this week's question. This week's trivia question is, who is the Giant who has made the most career tackles since they kept track of individual tackles? So individual tackles haven't been, that's not a 100-year statistic, but since that's been tracked, which Giant has made the most career tackles while playing for the Giants? Okay, so that's this week's trivia question. That's this week's NFC East report. Again, I am Clay from Brooklyn, Football with the Fellas. It's all about Big Blue. Happy holidays to you, and I'm out.
Big shout out to El Marquis Productions, the talent behind the music and production here at Football with the Fellas. It's all about Big Blue. Their beats bring energy and excitement to every episode. El Marquis' skills in mixing, mastering, and creating top quality sound make the podcast come alive each week. For your own projects, check out elmarquisproductions.com and take your sound to the next level.